Welcome to my calm revenge. You know, sometimes betrayal doesn't come crashing into your life like a storm. Sometimes it seeps in slowly, quietly, like water finding cracks in a wall. And before you realize what has happened, everything you thought was solid begins to crumble. That is exactly how my story begins. My name is Sarah. I was married to Daniel for nearly 12 years. To the outside world, we looked like a stable, loving couple. We owned a modest home, had careers we were proud of, and spent weekends with friends. People often told me I was lucky to have a husband who seemed devoted, lucky to have a life that looked, at least from the outside, steady and secure. But life has a way of teaching us that appearances can be very different from reality. I first met her, Emily, through my husband. She worked in his office, a younger woman, bright and charming, the kind who knew how to draw attention without looking like she was trying. At first, I didn't think much of her. Daniel mentioned her in passing, the way you might casually talk about a coworker, and when I met her at a company gathering, she was friendly, all smiles, eager to talk. I thought she was sweet. I even liked her. And maybe that was my first mistake. Not paying attention, not noticing the way Daniel's eyes lingered a little longer on her than they should. For months, I told myself there was nothing wrong. I trusted my husband completely. But slowly, small signs began to show. He started coming home late. At first, it was just work. Then, he was suddenly tired all the time, distracted, checking his phone more often than he ever did before. When I asked, he would brush it off with a smile. And I wanted to believe him. I truly did. Because when you've built your life around someone, believing otherwise feels like pulling the floor out from under your own feet. But the truth has a way of showing itself, whether you're ready or not. One evening, I went to the office to surprise Daniel. I thought it would be a kind gesture, bring him dinner, spend a little time together. But when I walked into his workspace, he wasn't there. His phone, however, was left on the desk, and it lit up with a message. It was from Emily. The words were simple, nothing overly intimate at first glance, but the tone, the way she wrote to him, it was enough to make my heart sink. I can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook, but my mind was strangely calm. I didn't explode, didn't cry, didn't storm out. Instead, I quietly left, dinner still in my hands, and drove home in silence. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. If Daniel had chosen her over me, then so be it. I couldn't force someone to love me, and I wouldn't beg. But Emily had known. She had come into my life, smiled at me, acted like a friend, all while taking something that wasn't hers. She didn't just betray me, she mocked my trust. And for that, I wasn't going to forgive her. But I also wasn't going to scream or fight or let myself be broken in front of them. No, my revenge would be different. Quiet, calm, but devastating. The first step was simple. I needed to be patient. When Daniel finally confessed, when he sat me down a few weeks later and said, in his guilty, rehearsed voice, that he had fallen in love with Emily, I listened. I let him talk. I even nodded, pretending to be understanding. Inside, my heart burned, but on the outside, I was composed. He said he didn't want to hurt me, that he hoped we could end things peacefully, that Emily had nothing against me, that these things just happen. Imagine the audacity of that. But I didn't argue. Instead, I told him I agreed. If this was what he wanted, I wouldn't stand in the way. And so, the divorce went smoothly. He thought I was being mature, even kind. He had no idea that while I was signing papers, I was already planning the quiet destruction of the woman he had chosen over me. Revenge, you see, isn't about rage. It's about precision. It's about knowing exactly where to strike, so that when the blow lands, it shatters everything they thought was secure. And Emily had plenty of weak points. She loved the spotlight, loved the image of being admired. She was building her career, her reputation, her social life, and she thought she had taken my place in that picture-perfect marriage. But what she didn't know was that I had access to the pieces of Daniel she had no idea about, his financial habits, his debts, his secrets. And by stepping into his life, she was stepping straight into the storm I was preparing. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to take everything she thought she had won. And she wouldn't see it coming. Revenge, if you really think about it, is like playing chess. It isn't about the first move. It's about the long game, planning 10 steps ahead, seeing the board clearly, and making sure every move looks harmless until suddenly it isn't. That was the mindset I adopted after Daniel left me for Emily. I let the world think I was simply moving on, quietly adjusting to my new life. But deep inside, I was patient, waiting for the right openings. The first thing I realized was this: if I tried to confront Emily directly, it would only feed her ego. She would see me as the bitter ex-wife, clinging to what was gone. That wasn't the picture I wanted her to have of me. No, I wanted her to believe she had won. I wanted her to feel safe, secure, untouchable. Because only then would the fall be truly devastating. Emily moved into Daniel's life quickly, too quickly. Within months of our divorce being finalized, she was living in what used to be my home. The house I decorated, the walls I painted, the furniture I had chosen piece by piece. She stepped into it as if it had always belonged to her. And that, strangely, worked in my favor. Because everything Daniel owned, and everything Emily now enjoyed, was familiar to me. I knew his habits, his patterns, his weaknesses. And Emily, blinded by her so-called victory, never questioned the foundation of the life she had stepped into. But that foundation was cracked, and I was going to widen those cracks until everything collapsed. The first step was subtle: financial pressure. Daniel was terrible with money. For years, I had managed the household bills, the savings, the small investments. Without me, he was careless. He liked to spend: a new car, fancy dinners, spontaneous vacations. And Emily, from what I could already see, encouraged that lifestyle. She loved showing off on social media, posting pictures of weekend getaways, expensive gifts, bottles of wine at fancy restaurants. What she didn't know was that Daniel was already living beyond his means. During the divorce, I let him keep certain accounts he thought were valuable. But what he didn't realize was that they came with obligations, debts he had ignored, hidden fees that piled up. I knew with certainty that without me balancing the books, his finances would slowly sink. So I waited. I let them spend. I let Emily post her glamorous pictures, and all the while, the bills stacked higher. The second step was reputation. Emily prided herself on her career. She wanted respect, recognition, and above all, admiration. In her world, appearances mattered more than substance. She had built this image of being sophisticated and ambitious, but I knew things she didn't want others to know. Like the way she had manipulated her way into promotions at work, flattering her bosses, taking credit for projects, subtly undermining colleagues. I had heard Daniel brag about her tactics, thinking it was clever, but I also knew how dangerous those kinds of secrets could be if they slipped into the wrong ears. So I began to talk, not loudly, not directly, but quietly, carefully, to the right people. At social gatherings, I would mention little stories. At casual meetups, I would drop hints. Nothing slanderous, nothing that could come back to me directly, just enough to make others question her character. "She's smart," I would say with a small smile, though I've heard she can be ambitious in ways not everyone appreciates. Or, "Daniel says she's very persuasive. He jokes that she always gets what she wants, no matter the cost. People filled in the blanks on their own, and once whispers begin, they have a way of spreading faster than the truth. Meanwhile, Daniel and Emily's perfect relationship wasn't so perfect after all. You see, Daniel had always loved being adored. With me, over the years, that shine had worn off, as it does in most long relationships. But with Emily, at first, he felt young again, admired, like the hero of his own story. But people don't change overnight. His flaws, the ones I had lived with for years, soon began to surface in her world too. His short temper when things didn't go his way, his habit of blaming others when he made mistakes, his restless nature, always wanting more, never satisfied with what he had. And I knew exactly how to bring those flaws to the surface faster. One of the easiest ways to test a relationship is through stress. And money, as I mentioned, was already becoming a problem for them. Late payments, overdraft notices, calls from creditors. At first, Daniel probably smoothed it over with excuses, but I made sure the pressure didn't ease. Through mutual connections, I let slip certain pieces of information, small details that would reach Daniel's professional world. Opportunities he thought were available suddenly vanished. Business contacts became distant. He didn't know why, but I did. I had been planting seeds, reminding people quietly that Daniel wasn't as reliable as he seemed, that maybe his sudden lifestyle change was affecting his judgment. Nothing direct, just enough to make them hesitate in trusting him fully. The more his professional standing shook, the more stress fell into their household. And Emily, who thought she had stolen the perfect husband, began to realize she had inherited the cracks I knew all too well. But I didn't stop there. The third step was personal. Emily had stolen my husband, but she also tried to steal my friends. She acted as though by being with Daniel, she had a right to the social circles I had built over years. At first, some of them welcomed her politely, but friendships are delicate, and loyalty runs deeper than charm. So I made sure Emily never truly belonged. Whenever she tried to host gatherings, I quietly hosted something of my own, just before or after. People preferred coming to me. I was calm, warm, familiar. She, on the other hand, always seemed like she was trying too hard, and the more she tried, the more transparent it became. Over time, she became isolated, present but not included, smiling but not genuinely accepted. It was subtle, but I could see it eating away at her. By the end of that first year, the picture Emily had painted of her new life began to crack. The financial pressure grew heavier. Her career wasn't advancing as smoothly. Her friendships felt hollow. And Daniel was starting to show his true self to her. I remember seeing them once at a cafe, purely by chance. They sat across from each other, not talking, both scrolling through their phones, their faces tense. Emily looked tired, older somehow, and Daniel looked dissatisfied. That moment was more powerful than any confrontation could have been. Because I knew she was already losing, and I hadn't even made my final move yet. You see, revenge is not only about what you take away, it's about timing, about making sure the fall comes at the exact moment when they think they've finally regained balance. Emily thought she had stolen everything from me, my husband, my home, my place in our shared world. But in truth, she had walked straight into a trap she never even saw. And now it was time to finish what I had started. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a shadow slipping through a door, and by the time you notice, it's already too late. That's how I wanted my revenge to feel for Emily. Quiet, inevitable, impossible to escape. By the time the second year rolled around, she was already exhausted. The glamour of being with Daniel had faded, replaced by stress, tension, and disappointment. Their finances were strained. Their reputations were shaky. Their relationship no longer glowed with the spark of forbidden love. But Emily was stubborn. She clung to the idea that she had won. She wanted to prove to the world, and maybe to herself, that stealing Daniel was worth it, that she had built a better life than the one I had. I couldn't allow that. This was where the final act of my plan began. The first thing I targeted was trust. Every relationship, no matter how flawed, rests on a fragile web of trust. And I knew Daniel well enough to know where to pull the threads. He was insecure, always suspicious when someone got too close to Emily. He wanted to be admired, yes, but he also wanted control. I began with small things, a rumor here, a suggestion there. Through mutual acquaintances, I let slip that Emily had been seen getting close to a coworker. Nothing specific, nothing too heavy, just enough for Daniel to hear about it and start questioning her. And the beautiful part? I didn't have to lie. Emily was naturally flirtatious. She thrived on attention. She might not have meant anything by it, but I knew Daniel's jealousy would twist it into something darker. Soon, their arguments spilled into the open. Friends whispered about shouting matches, about cold silences at dinner parties. Emily, once so proud of her stolen prize, now had to defend herself constantly against the very man she had chosen. And all I had to do was sit back and watch the cracks widen. The second strike came in the form of exposure. Emily had built her career on manipulation, charm, and shortcuts, but she had also left behind plenty of evidence of those shortcuts. I still had access to emails, old messages Daniel had once carelessly shared with me, documents that showed just how she had maneuvered her way up. I didn't publish them. I didn't need to. Instead, I anonymously passed them to the right people in her workplace, those who already felt threatened by her, those who had quietly resented her rise. It didn't take long. A project she had claimed credit for suddenly resurfaced with questions. A report she had perfected was revealed to be largely the work of someone else. Small things, but enough to shake her reputation. She wasn't fired, no. That would have been too simple. Instead, she was overlooked. Opportunities that once fell into her lap began to pass her by. Colleagues stopped trusting her. Supervisors praised others more. Her career didn't collapse dramatically. It simply stalled, leaving her frustrated, bitter, and desperate. And once again, I didn't have to lift a finger in public. She was the one destroying herself piece by piece. But perhaps the most satisfying part was the home. The house that had once been mine. The house where I had laughed, cried, dreamed. The place she thought she had stolen along with Daniel. Daniel, as I knew, could not keep up with the payments. When I left, I had taken with me the stability, the careful budgeting, the silent work that kept everything afloat. Without me, his spending spiraled. Bills were missed, repairs were ignored, debt piled higher. It was only a matter of time before they had to sell. And when they did, guess who bought it? Me! I waited until it was listed, then quietly purchased it through a family friend. No one knew at first, not Daniel, not Emily. But the day I walked through those doors again, legally holding the deed, I felt a calmness wash over me that words can barely describe. Emily had thought she had taken my place in that home. Now she was forced to pack her things, to leave behind the walls she had claimed as hers, and watch me step back into the very space she had stolen. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence of my presence was enough. By now, Emily's life was unraveling. Her career was stagnant. Her finances were crumbling. Her relationship with Daniel was toxic. And her social circle, once full of admiration, had grown thin, with people drifting back toward me or away from her entirely. And then came the final blow. Daniel, restless as ever, began to stray. The very behavior he had once used to betray me, he now turned on Emily. She had thought she was special, that she was different, that he had chosen her out of love. But in truth, he was simply a man who could never be satisfied. When she discovered his infidelity, the devastation on her face, I am told, was unmistakable. Friends described how broken she looked, how her pride shattered when she realized she was no different from me in his eyes. Except there was a difference. When he betrayed me, I rebuilt. I regained my life, my stability, my dignity. When he betrayed her, she had nothing left to stand on. Because I had already taken it all away. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to show the world what I had done. My revenge was never about proving something to others. It was about balance, about showing Emily, and perhaps even Daniel, that actions have consequences. She stole my husband, and in return, I took her comfort, her reputation, her stability, and her illusions of victory. Everything she thought she had gained turned to dust in her hands. And me? I walked away calm, steady, and free. You see, revenge doesn't have to be violent or dramatic. It doesn't have to burn hot with rage. Sometimes, the coldest, calmest revenge is simply letting people drown in the weight of their own choices, with just the slightest nudge in the right direction. And that's exactly what I gave her. So, if you've ever felt betrayed, if someone has ever taken something from you and you've wondered how to respond, remember my story. You don't always need to fight loudly. You don't always need to confront. Sometimes the quietest actions, the patient planning, the calm decisions, leave the deepest mark. And with that, my story comes to an end. If you've been with me all this way, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this calm revenge story, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories to come, stories of betrayal, patience, and the quiet power of justice served calmly. Until next time, remember, silence can be the sharpest weapon of all.